Welcome to Wisconsin in Focus. I'm JD Davidson. PFAS, or forever chemicals, have been a recent issue in several states around the country, and Wisconsin isn't an exception. A plan and cash to deal with the issue is being developed, but Governor Tony Evers apparently isn't a fan. Joining me today is the Center Square's Wisconsin contributor, Ben Yao. Ben, what are the governor's issues with this plan?
The governor says he wants to hold polluters accountable. And the Republicans who support this plan are absolutely on board with that when you talk about the people who create or are the origin of these PFAS chemicals, these forever chemicals. And mostly what we're talking about is we're talking about either big companies. 3M uses PFAS in everything from, Teflon on nonstick skillets to those paper wrappers that your hamburgers come in. But here in Wisconsin specifically, it's about firefighting foam. A company up by Green Bay, Johnson Control, makes this stuff. And just about every airport in the state uses this because it's really good at putting out jet fires. Water, not so much. This firefighting foam is great at it. And so what you've had is years and years and years of testing, years and years and years of use. And so when you go and you test the water near the airport in La Crosse, let's say, it spikes for these forever chemicals. And that's led to some people there in the La Crosse area, specifically a French island or French's Island. They got to drink bottled water. The states come in and said, hey, don't drink the tap water. Drink bottled water. You can still shower with it. You can still cook with it, but don't drink the tap water. Don't drink the water that comes from the local water supply. And so what Republicans have said is, hey, absolutely. If we find a company, if we find somebody who's just pouring these chemicals in, absolutely, let's hold them accountable. Let's make sure they pay for the cleanup. Let's make sure that they stop what they're doing. The governor wants to include anyone who has PFAS chemicals found on their land or in their water in that list of polluters. So if you live downstream from one of these airports, if you live downstream from somebody who uses these chemicals, and you go and you test your well water or you test the spring or the creek that's running through your backyard, and all of a sudden you spike for PFAS, now you're a polluter. And the governor wants the Department of Natural Resources to be able to come, force you to pay for it. That then sets off this whole brownfield discussion of you're never going to be able to sell your house. You may not be able to get insurance for your house. You may, and this is the fear from Republicans. They say, look, we simply want to help clean up the water. Let's not try and go down the litigation route just yet. Let's take care of one problem before we worry about the other problem.
Is there a middle? I mean, it makes sense that if I bought a house a couple of years ago that's 10 miles away from where something had happened, that I shouldn't be responsible for it. The person 10 miles up the road should. But there needs to be some sort of, you just can't help but worry that if there isn't something available to hold the specific groups accountable, then nobody will be held accountable.
And we have to remember here, there are a couple of different things. To answer your question quickly, no, there's no middle ground. But you got to remember that PFAS contamination, PFAS pollution is a relatively new thing. The federal government just set standards that for the longest time, Wisconsin didn't have any standard at all. So the reason that there weren't a lot of people testing, the reason that there wasn't a lot of attention is that this wasn't something on the radar. The other thing that you have to keep in mind here is that this debate is very much like secondhand smoke, right? There are a lot of states that are looking to sue to get a big settlement over PFAS chemicals. I know 3M's facing a lawsuit currently. But unlike cigarettes and, say, stewardesses on airlines, there's no A to B to C that says, well, if you have this many parts per million of PFAS chemicals in your water, you're going to grow a third arm or you're going to have some sort of medical emergency. There is no study out there. There's no evidence that this stuff directly makes you sick. I'm sure it's not good to be drinking more and more chemicals. I think we can all pretty much agree on that.
Sure.
Part of the difficulty here is this is all of the science and all of the focus is relatively new. and you add in that sort of prioritizing that states love to do of, hey, you know what, 3M's a something billion something dollar company. Maybe we could, and that's the problem. Now, to get back to the first question of, is there a middle ground? This is part of the debate here in Wisconsin, that you have a governor who does not like working with the Republican legislature. He wants to do what he wants to do. And he's done most of this through the administrative rules process. He's just been ordering his DNR to do this. And he wants the Department of Natural Resources to be very aggressive with enforcement, not just on PFAS, but on a bunch of other environmental issues in the state of Wisconsin. And so this is part of that ongoing fight between lawmakers who want some restraints on what the governor can do, on how the governor plans to use the DNR. We'll do a podcast one of these days on cow farms and you know what to do with the manure from the cows that the dairy state needs to be the dairy state. But this is all part of that mix. And so to find a middle ground where both sides are going to be comfortable, I don't see it happening. And that's why the governor is promising to veto this and could do it. I mean, we're taping this on a Thursday morning. He could do it now or by noon today, because I think the clock is running on that plan.
Oh, but he still wants the money.
Oh, yeah. No, he still wants the money. He still wants the $125 million. I mean, he may have different environmental goals, but $125 million is $125 million. And that was his compromise, that he wanted to, well, let's compromise on this. I'll veto the legislation, but you give me the money to spend. And
that's a fair deal.
Yeah, no, Republicans at the Capitol are not going to give this man any more money than they absolutely have to.
You know, that seems to be an ongoing issue, not just in Wisconsin, to be fair. Any state where there's a split, nobody seems to want to work together on anything. And you're right, the forever chemical issue is relatively new. I do think putting something in place that, like the Republicans have proposed, is a good start. And I think right now what you're looking for is a first step.
Yeah. And this gets down to the line from Republicans is, look, we want to clean up the water. That's the first thing. Let's clean up the water. Let's make sure that the people who live out by La Crosse don't have to drink bottled water forever because of something that we can fix. And the $125 million would go to grants to make sure that, you know, pay for some testing. And then if you do see a test where, okay, now we've got to do something here, it can help that city, help that community, help that county go ahead. But look, this is going to be the theme going forward until the election in November, and then really until a new legislature is sworn in next January here in Wisconsin, that the governor is not going to accept anything less than 100%, because come this time next year, he may have a Democratic-led legislature, and he has the Wisconsin Supreme Court ruling in his favor on everything that goes to the court. So why take 90% when you may get 110% from the court in just a couple of months? The problem is, when you're dealing with this, people are going to continue to have to deal with forever chemicals in their water until the governor gets his way politically. And that's where this becomes not just a political story, but okay, can we clean the water? Can we fix the roads? Can we make sure kids read? That's what government's supposed to do, not just bicker about who's in charge and who has more votes.
And people tend to suffer when all there is bickering. Ben, thanks for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com.
Some people would call him a loser. He ran for state office. He was beaten. He started a business. He failed. He ran for Congress. He lost. He was nominated for vice president. He lost again. But he knew only those who never tried are the real losers. And Abraham Lincoln was no loser. Persistence. Pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.